Well, they call him the natural. Naturalist can be. Yeah, they call him the natural.
One of the greatest WCW theme songs of all time, The Natural. Call him The Natural. And this is NoSo Countdown War Games Edition. I am JT. Joining me is my good, longtime close little friend, Kelly Nelson. And, of course, you see him here on the NoSo Connection regularly with touchdowns to turnbuckles. Kelly, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, great to see you, JT. I'm glad you agree about the natural theme. It's my favorite from the era, too, by far.
It's a class. We had two classic themes. We'll hear the other one on the way out, and that's the Stud Stable, which is another all-timer, I think, from WCW. Just great, especially here where they're all coming out as a crew with that little rumbling, rambling tune that they come out to. So, if you're watching, I say if you're watching, of course you're watching because this is video only. We're here on YouTube. And this is the NoSo Connections YouTube, so be sure to subscribe and leave a comment and a like. And this is our daily countdown series. We're counting down to this year's War Games of Survivor Series by ranking every War Games ever from WCW, JCP, WWE, NXT, all 23 of them. And today you and I, Kelly, are covering number 12. And that is from Fall Brawl 1994, as Dusty Rhodes, Dustin Rhodes, and the Nasty Boys take on Terry Funk, Arn Anderson, Bunkhouse Buck, and Colonel Robert Parker, the Stud Stable. And really quickly, we'll lay out the ratings that are out there amongst the wrestling universe. We have a cage match rating of 6.44. Dave Meltzer went 3.25. Chad Campbell was at 4.25. And when Chad and I did our tier ranking of all the WCW War Games, we had this in tier 4. So let's quickly talk about the build to this, Kel. I personally think it's legendary, but I want your thoughts first. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's, I think, something that's boosted its reputation over the years is the build, especially Dusty's involvement. You have the great promo where he reunites with Dustin. That's become legendary over the years. I watched 2 videos before this. I watched the Dustin reuniting video, and then the Dusty recruits the Nasty Boys video, which is the other one that's kind of become maybe like almost cult status over the years. One of the more memorable of WCW's videos that they were doing at the time. Some were really great in the 90s, some of those videos. Some were, of course, legendarily bad, or so bad they're good, or whatever you want to call them. But this one's, very memorable. Dusty hadn't really been involved much wrestling-wise in quite a while, too, before this feud, so that made it important. And, yeah, it boosted Dustin up. This feud had been going on for ages at this point. I think it started just with Dustin and Bunkhouse Buck. It's been a long time since of course, and with Robert Parker. It's been a long time, but I was watching week to week at this time. I finally convinced my dad to get TBS at like the beginning of 1994. Before that, I was actually so desperate. I'd watch the scrambled versions of TBS and just listen to WCW Saturday night. But, us wrestling fans will go to any length to watch or listen to wrestling. So yeah, 94, I had it all. There was so much great stuff before Hogan came in and ruined everything. So this was after Hogan came in, but it was still good. This is, and we'll talk about this later, how this was kind of the end of an era for WCW, this feud, end of Southern style booking in WCW. But yeah, great build. The Dusty promo, like I said, I neglected you. The view never changes. Like, how many iconic lines, like one after the next. It's an all-time Dusty promo. It's amazing. And then the Nasty Boys recruitment was great too. Dusty coming in to a, kind of like a biker bar or whatever, in a cowboy hat, and then by the end, everyone loves him, and he recruits the Nasty Boys. I couldn't really remember the Nasty Boys arc at this point or story. Like, were they baby faces already, JT?
No, so they were not. So they had been heels since they arrived in 93. Earlier in 94, they had the great series with Cactus and Max Payne and the Cactus and Sullivan. So this is like in that little window after that feud.
Yeah.
And then they kind of didn't have like a ton going on leading up to this. So no, this is their face turn. Them joining the Rhodes Boys essentially turns them face, which is what they'll be till the end of their run. really to the end of their career as a tag team in 97. The Bunkhouse Buck Dustin feud, I think, really started like in April. They fight, well, probably before that, but they fight at Spring Stampede. And then it rolls on through Slamboree. And then, of course, Arn offers his services to team with Dustin at Bash of the Beach. Everyone knew it was coming. Dustin even knew it. He even said, like, if you screw me, like, I'm going to kill you, basically. And Arn turns on him, joins the stud stable. And then, yes, Clash of the Champions, one of the greatest Dusty promos. When you walk behind, the view never changes. And Arn Anderson is a walk behind. And, you know, Dusty leads the way. He's like, please forgive me and let me be your partner. And I don't think he had wrestled since his comeback to WCW in 91. Like, I think he had only been an announcer. So I think this is like his first match televised since Rumble 91. Like, I don't think he has anything between those two. So and that was also with Dustin, interestingly enough. And the bar stuff with the Nasties is great. And then I also love the showdown with Ming, because Ming gets introduced in this storyline too as Parker's bodyguard, and where Dusty smashes a chair over Ming's head and he just completely no-sells it, and Dusty like stares at him. Like, that put Ming over big time. And then Parker, of course, tries to get out of the match and get Ming in a spot. And there's a good moment on Saturday night where he gets told, you have to compete. The word just came down from the committee that you have to compete. It can't be Ming. So Parker's forced into this. And we see that early when they come down the aisle. You get the stud stable all come out to their theme. And Parker's trying to get out of it the whole time. But what do you think about Dustin in this moment? So he's a War Games veteran. This is his third in a row. So he comes out. He doesn't seem as nervous. Like, he knows the cage, right? Like, he gives off that vibe. And there's a world where, like, the Hogan thing isn't happening, that this is like Dustin's launch to a main event. He's main eventing a pay-per-view. He's the number one guy on that team, and he's presented as such as he comes out and everything. Like, he felt like this is the dude that we're going with going forward as a star. So what did you think? Like, did you get that vibe watching this again? Like, it really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I did totally. Yeah, like you said, he had been, being built up for several years at this point, and I liked him right from the beginning. Maybe not so much in WWF, where it came off like, oh, this is nepotism and Dusty's son and all that. But watching WCW, I did get to see some of the shows because I did have a friend who had TBS, so he would record certain shows. So I saw like the big tag match with Ricky Steamboat at that Clash of the Champions where they won the tag team titles. And then, the War Games involvements and a feud with Rick Rude. Like, he was U.S. champion. He was basically number 2. And if Hogan didn't come in, it seems like, I mean, he would have had Sting to contend with for the top spot, of course. But I think he had to go higher because he'd done pretty much everything as a mid-carder, as a U.S. title guy. It would have been very interesting because, I felt the same way I was watching this because I was thinking, well, just in a year or just over a year, or no, about a year, he'd be Goldust in the WWF.
Yeah, gone within months. Yeah.
Yeah. But watching this, it felt like, he is one of the top guys in WCW, because sometimes you think, or the narrative is that, oh, he had to go to WWF to save his career, to take that next step or whatever. And he did reinvent himself, and it was a good move, I think, to get out from his father's shadow and all that. But it's not like he was suffering that much. It's not like he was suffering that much as far as his placement on the card and stuff. I've always liked the Natural. It gets overshadowed by the Goldust character a year later, but it as far as like being the son of a famous wrestler, I think he always accounted himself very well, and definitely followed in his father's footsteps to an extent. I mean, Dusty is such a huge star and such a huge personality. You could never, you couldn't recapture that, and nor would you want to. But he carved out a great career, and I don't know if we'll talk about this later. How so many of the guys in this match are still involved in wrestling on a big stage 30 years later is pretty remarkable too.
They I think it's this isn't the forum, but the ultimate all-time what if is like, right, what if Hogan doesn't go to WCW, because the product was so good and enjoyable in 94, but would they have gotten to those heights without the Hogan stuff? I don't know. Like, they might have just been very comfortably number 2, right, for a long time. But it also may have never changed WWF. They might have never had to change their format and what we got out of them. So I guess it depends on your view of what's good and what's bad, but it's an interesting inflection point. So let's get to the match. I love starting with Dustin and Arn. They're not saving it at all. Like, that's the rivalry right now. They go right in. They're beating the shit out of each other. You get the classic staple of Arn getting his head stuck between the rings, in between his head. That's a repeat from previous years, but it's always a pop. I liked the touch where Bobby is calling his first War Games, and he's kind of learning on the fly with this like childlike excitement all throughout. He's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You're telling me another guy's coming in already? Like, the whole match, he's like very dialed in. And I think 94 Bobby's very underrated as he's learning the landscape of WCW and like outwardly expressing how interested and excited he is by these things.
Oh yeah, totally. I was thinking when I was watching this, when did he come in? I couldn't remember the exact
February
time. And then Mean Gene had arrived around like a bit earlier, I guess, than Heenan. So yeah, you had this weird, 80s WWF all-star team sort of thing going on. No, he definitely added to it, and him and Schiavone had good chemistry on commentary.
So it's all brawling, as you'd expect. Funk really amps it up. I love the spot where Sags pile drives Funk and he falls between the rings, like a really creative looking spot. He's going to climb his way out between the rings. He's trapped down there. I like the use of Funk's boot as a weapon. They didn't go crazy. We didn't need a lot, but the boot like really sounded good. It looked good when they used it throughout the match. So that was cool. You get the blood as always. It's a War Games. Parker, when it's his turn to go in, just freaking out and stalling. And Nick Patrick is so good here. He's like, I don't know, man. You're going to get in there. I don't make the rules. He's like, just got to go, dude. I'm trying to do my fucking job. Get out of here. So that was funny. It was almost like a guy who like didn't want to go on a roller coaster. It was like being pushed by his friends to go on. Like, come on, you can do it. He kept turning like he was going to leave and then come back in. And then he's such a great stooge once he gets in there. Like, he's just getting beaten around right away. But then he turns it. He starts using the belt. He's whipping the shit out of Sags. But then Dustin gets the belt. He beats the shit out of him, gets some good receipts on the whole stud stable. The crowd starts to erupt here as he's using the belt. And then they start chanting Dusty, which is just awesome. Like, saving Dusty for last is a no-brainer, obviously. He comes in, he cleans house. Ming is awesome at ringside. He's losing his fucking mind as Parker's getting the shit kicked out of him. He can't do his job as bodyguard. He's just like stomping around ringside. And then Dusty hooks the figure four. And I like this finish. Like, Parker's in the figure four, and the Nasties are just laying bombs on him as he's in the figure four. Like, Knobs big splashes him. Sags is dropping elbows. And then he finally gives up, and the crowd just goes batshit. And then Ming comes in. They raise the cage. Ming comes in. He's cradling Parker like in his arms as the stud stable is in shock, and Team Dusty leaves. And I like that there was no post. I was worried that Ming was. I forgot like if Ming attacked them after. Like, I was glad it ended with them standing tall and the stud stable like a mess in the ring. So I thought the match itself, Kelly, was really, really good. I ended up going 4 stars on this viewing of it. Like, I think it was well worked. The crowd was super into it. It's all old school brawling. Where do you stand as far as like a rating goes?
Yeah, I'd say 4. Because I don't do quarters, and so 4.5 would be too much. But 4, it's a solid 4. I don't know if, I guess maybe there's a little blood. There's not much. It's not like previous years.
No, not where it's bleeding buckets.
Yeah, and that's what knocks it down in a lot of fans' eyes, is they compare it to the earlier War Games that were bloodbaths. And with the guys involved, with Funk, Dusty, Arn, you think you should have had some color. Dustin too wasn't afraid to bleed, so that would have been nice. But I can understand because it was firmly in the era where they were very sanitized. So you
get like a little. Yeah, little hints of it, but nothing bleeding buckets like 92 or previous years.
Yeah, they had definitely tightened up things when it came to bleeding at this time. But like so many great guys in this, having Arn and Funk in it on the same side, that's so cool. Terry just had such an interesting 1994 because he was involved in so many different promotions. He was, of course, in ECW, but he was also in Smoky Mountain a lot in 1994. And then I think in 94, he was also in the famous Exploding Cage with Otani in Japan. So he had, like so many highlights. It was crazy. Like, he was just a globe-trotting, crazy wrestler who was still at the top of his game. The pile driver that he took looked borderline dangerous, but at this time, everything Funk didn't have this like edge to it, this like sense that, you know, it could go crazy wrong at any moment. Colonel Parker being involved, it's funny because as a wrestler, like they were, of course, acting like in WCW that he didn't have a history like WWF would do with guys, and that he wasn't Robert Fuller earlier in Continental Southeastern, where he was involved in so many bloody brawls and was, you know, not shy to fighting in this. And you did get a glimpse of that when he came in. He immediately, almost immediately, started, you know, throwing pretty good punches and then, like you said, whipping with the belt, and definitely like suddenly switched back to being Robert Fuller in some wild Southern brawl. This one is definitely one of the more underrated war games, because for years it got overlooked. A lot of people at this time were, you know, not interested in the Southern style booking anymore. It felt old fashioned. I think at this time, like for me, Bunkhouse Buck definitely felt like a cartoon character, or just, you know, I was into more serious guys at this time. Of course, I was a surly teenager, so I was into the.
And the Nasties too weren't always like a team that was looked at as like a good work rate. So when you look at the collection of talent in here, it's like besides Arn and Funk, if you're just kind of, if you're not like a hardcore territory guy, like it's not a lot that jumps out at you. Old Dusty, who hadn't wrestled in 3 years, you know, and of course Dustin. So you got Dustin, Arn, and Funk, but the rest is like, And yeah, it's such a weird little time period in here. Like we're post Hogan.
True. Yeah.
You know, we're post Hogan, like you said, but it's like, it's this little relic that just kind of exists in this pocket of time before Hogan envelops the whole promotion. Like, I feel like the Hogan era truly starts at Halloween Havoc when he beats Flair in the cage. Like, to me, that's when, because then Savage shows up, Duggan shows up. Like, it's kind of around then is when things really start to amp up. Honky Tonk Man, like all that shit starts at like Halloween Havoc. So I feel like this is kind of the weird transition phase. And to me, this really is the last old school classic Crockett style NWA feud and match before we get full on WWF light. I mean, there's still vestiges, the Horsemen are still a thing in the future, but it's very different in this presentation. Like to me, this was Dusty Rhodes War Games, Arn Anderson War Games, like, you know, old school Terry Funk in a bar. Like this just felt very gritty and just classic Crockett. And the fans react to it. So, I mean, like they love it. They're in this moment 100%. So
yeah,
like we said in the beginning, like it's an age old debate of, you know, would they have been better off staying the course and growing organically this way, or taking the kill shot with Hogan? I mean, I think they'll tell you that business wise, you made the right call probably with Hogan, but from a pure creative fandom standpoint, what they had going on in '94 was just so exciting. And it just feels completely, you know, cut at the knees once we get to Havoc.
Yeah, that's totally true. Yeah, from like a hardcore fan perspective, hardcore appreciating the Southern style. Yeah, this was great stuff. But it was, you know, Hogan was inevitable at this point, and they had to go with him for sure. Because they'd been struggling for years. Like '94 was great, but then you had, you know, is always cited as a great year, and business was so poor that year. It wasn't cutting it. Although, you know, they shot themselves in the foot a lot of times with their home base of fans that wanted the, you know, traditional style, and what Smoky Mountain was doing at the same time. There was still like a large market for that, but it wasn't a national market, and that was the way things were going with cable, and it was just an evolution that you couldn't really fight the tide of. But I'm glad we got this, because it was a good capper to an era. Hogan wasn't even on the show, so it was like almost going back a few months before he came to tie things up. And you're right, going forward, Hogan's of course involved heavily, and you have the cage match with Flair. It would have been interesting to see Hogan try to adapt to the Southern style, which I guess he does in some respects with the Horsemen and stuff, but in a more like Hogan and Funk
early on,
like that. Yeah.
I think early on he does adapt a little bit, like these first few shows. Again, the matches with Flair, like I really feel like it's when Savage comes in and Beefcake and the Dungeon of Doom, like that's when it shifts to Hulkamania phase. So I really think I would say by Starrcade is when it really shifts. I think we still have this weird transition between Bash of the Beach and Havoc, and then from when Earthquake debuts at Havoc, and Beefcake turns, like, to me that's where it really becomes Hogan and Buddies.
Yeah, totally.
So this match ranks at 12th on our list. We don't know what's ahead of it, so we'll see coming forward.
Oh, okay.
But going back, it's above a couple of NXT War Games, which you and I aren't as dialed in on. But it's also above 2 spots ahead of the 89 War Games with the Road Warriors, Midnight Express, and Dr. Death against the Freebirds and the Samoans. And then it's 4 spots ahead of 96 and 5 ahead of 97. So do you feel like that feels right in those spots, 96, 97, 89 behind this?
Yeah, I would definitely put it ahead of the 96, 97 ones, because those kind of blur in my mind, and all the NWO ones were, more hype than substance. The 1989 one is a good comparison to this one because it's also one of the more underrated War Games. It also didn't have blood, I believe. It didn't have as much juice. It was a mid-card match. I mean, that was a stacked, like, all-time great pay-per-view, of course, legendary. But yeah, it was like in the middle. With tag teams and mid-card guys, it wasn't hyped up like previous War Games or subsequent War Games, but it's very entertaining. I would put this one, but I would put this one above it because this one had more stakes, more juice, Southern style feud, and a hot crowd, hot for Dusty coming in at the end. Great ending. Yeah, I didn't mention the finish. It was always great how in the War Games, the finish always had to have like a little extra bit of danger to it. It couldn't be just a regular submission. You had to do something over the top to make it a surrender or whatever. And so they did that in this one too, with the elbow drops and stuff. So I personally, I would put this in the top 10 if I was ranking War Games. I don't know. I've seen a couple of the early NXT ones and they were good. But I find it hard to, like, the old school fan in me, where they don't have the roof, they don't have blood. I can't. I wouldn't put them too terribly high. And but 12 is how many is there? 23 in total. I would find a spot for it in my personal top 10, but it's not like I would argue for it to be top 5 or anything.
Yeah, I think it depends on your view. Like if you're doing just the WCW NWA ones, you're well inside the top 10, I would assume. I mean, just based on what we've seen so far on the list and what's to come. But all right, so that'll do it. Look, we're back every day. We got 11 more days of this. Every day we got a new War Games video breaking down every single one. And we have tons of other great video content right here on NoSo Connection, plus some audio stuff too. So subscribe here on YouTube or in any podcast application as well. And be sure to check out Kelly on Touchdowns to Turnbuckles. I always invert it. Touchdowns to Turnbuckles. He's talking guys that played football transitioned over to pro wrestling. It's a great series. You learn a ton. If you're into wrestling and football history, you will be well educated by Kelly on that. So be sure to check that out. Kelly also pops in time to time on Chronoso as well. So, of course, you see me everywhere on North South if you watch. So until then, we're going to fire up some stud stable music, and we'll talk to you tomorrow back in the War Games NoSo Countdown.